I recently received an email from a lady. For the sake of this video, let's just call her Julie. Julie was taking a cruise from Spain a couple of weeks ago when something happened to her that she didn't even know could happen. She was emailing me to ask me if I could let my audience know about this because she didn't want to see anybody else in the same situation. Hey Spuds, welcome to my channel. My name is Emma and I'm here to show you how to cruise well on a budget so that you can travel further and experience more. On with the show. During the cruise, Julie started to get a bit of a sore throat and a bit of a cough, and she did exactly what you're supposed to do in that situation. She stayed in her cabin, she phoned the medical centre and they sent the medical team to her to test her for COVID. The test results did come back and she was COVID positive. She was moved to a quarantine cabin on the ship, and it was after this that things started to happen that she wasn't prepared for. On all mainstream cruise lines, you'll find a section of the ship which is closed off for quarantine. This is used not just for the passengers who may have tested positive for COVID, but also for any crew members who need to quarantine. Julie expected to quarantine in her cabin for a couple of days and then disembark at the end of the cruise. That does happen on some cruises in some places, but this was a fly cruise, meaning that Julie had flown from the UK to Spain, and the cruise line can't just disembark somebody at the end of the cruise and let them get on with it. This happened right at the start of Julie's cruise, so in theory, maybe she might have been able to fit in the isolation period on the ship, but the amount of time that you need to isolate for after testing positive does vary by different country, and the rules on that do keep changing. When the cruise ship docked the next day, Julie was taken off the ship and put into a hotel with other passengers who'd also tested positive. This happens all over the world, and the cruise lines have partnerships with certain hotels. It's not up to the people who have tested positive to try and find somewhere to stay. It's very much the cruise line's responsibility to have a plan in place. In some situations, the guests will have to pay upfront for their hotel accommodation and then claim it back from the travel insurance company. I'm not too sure what would happen in that situation if you just couldn't pay for it. It does highlight the importance of travel insurance though. Never take a cruise without cruise-specific travel insurance. Julie said at no point during her cruise booking process was she told that she may be disembarked in a foreign country, and I completely agree. I took a very similar cruise recently and nobody ever mentioned this as a risk, but it very much is a risk. It's a risk no matter where you cruise, and you have to be prepared for it. If you do catch COVID when you're on a cruise, it's up to the local countries that you're visiting and the cruise line if they quarantine you on the ship or they disembark you. The fact that this was a fly cruise and Julie had flown from the UK to Spain would mean that she would have to quarantine in Spain at the end of her cruise anyway, so I suppose that's really why they disembarked her as soon as they did. I didn't want to just put you can catch COVID on a cruise as one of the risks in this video, because I would hope by this point that that kind of is just a given. If you have a look at the number of people that have COVID, the percentage of people on land that have it, even though everybody on a cruise is vaccinated, mask wearing and tested, statistically some are still going to get through. You could pick up COVID on your way to the cruise port, you're going to test negative, but you still do have it and it will later develop. I don't really think that that is the important thing. It's much more important that nobody is unwell and how the cruise line deals with it. But if you're not prepared for the risk that you may get COVID on a cruise, don't go on a cruise. That said, the percentage of people on land who have COVID is way higher than even the worst outbreak on a cruise ship, so I know where I'd prefer to be. On my last cruise, COVID affected us in a way that I hadn't ever considered. One of my favourite things about cruising is the shows. I love the live music, I love the theatre entertainment, but the theatre team on a cruise ship have the same problems as any kind of theatre team on land. At the start of our cruise, everything was going well. We watched a number of shows that were fantastic. We did have quite a bit of bad weather on this cruise, so sometimes the shows would be rescheduled or they would be moved, but I had booked the shows every single day. I knew that I wanted to go, and I knew that we'd be able to catch up on them later in the cruise. Or so I thought. The theatre was absolutely huge and it is spread over 2 decks, meaning that everybody can see every show if they want to. On this cruise ship, the theatre was on decks 6 and 7, but those labels for those floors could be different if this ship was British or if it was American. Your Britishism of the week is how we label our floors in buildings. Here in the UK, the bottom floor that's on the ground is called the ground floor, and then the first floor is the first floor up. In the US, and I think quite a few other countries, the first floor is the bottom and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. I imagine that that one does cause quite a bit of confusion. It was towards the end of our cruise that an announcement was made that basically said that there wouldn't be any more shows from the theatre team during our cruise. I can only assume that that is because somebody in the theatre team tested positive for COVID. I don't know that for sure, but if somebody got injured or somebody got sick, the show would normally go on without them, and for the entire theatre team to be down, I can only guess that that was COVID related and they all had to isolate. Cruise ships do have amazing Broadway style productions and they are fantastic, but don't book a cruise just because you want to see a specific show or do a specific thing. It's always important to be flexible when cruising, but it is more important now than ever. Another risk that you take at the moment is related to the port stops. Of course, those port stops could be cancelled. It could be a case that you need to do extra tests to be able to disembark on land, but that's not the risk that I'm talking about right now. I've just booked a very cheap Caribbean cruise, a very cheap Caribbean cruise. I'll let you know more about it closer to the time, but it was almost instantly after I booked this cruise that we had an update to our itinerary. The main thing I'm looking forward to about this cruise is just feeling and seeing the sunshine again. I didn't have big plans about things I wanted to do in the specific ports. I thought that closer to the time I would work out what to do, but what happened with this update was that they said that in certain ports, it was around 50% of the ports on my itinerary, we would have to do cruise line excursions, or we would have to take an approved taxi to an approved location. We couldn't just get off and do whatever we wanted, which tends to be my go-to in most cruise ports. Updates like this can happen at any time, and it isn't the case that if one cruise line is going to a port and they're doing things by themselves that you will be able to if you go on another cruise line. This could change right up till the time that you do disembark. I am a firm believer that you don't need to spend a lot of money to have a good cruise, but part of that is being aware of what you need to pay for and just budgeting something extra in case you need to do some excursions in port. Whenever you press that book button right now on a cruise, you're taking the risk that that cruise may be cancelled or the itinerary may be changed. This happened on my last cruise, and the cruise I ended up on wasn't the cruise that I booked at all. It was a different ship, it was a different itinerary, and in hindsight, I don't think I would do this cruise again. To find out how this cruise went and how I fared in the roughest weather I've ever had on a cruise, check out this video next.